get started. Well, before I get started in the training, let's just take some quick questions. And I know my county sales records are behind by up to a year. Yeah, they what they do. Most counties are on a 2 year cycle, so every 2 years they're gonna revisit those prices, and they take half the county at a time. I think that's how most of them do it. All right, so today what we're going to be talking about is contracting with the seller. In fact, during our chat session, that's what I was doing. I was putting together the paperwork and to lock up that deal that I've got to, that we put together with that seller. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to go through and show you that process. You'll see the paperwork involved, but you'll also, more importantly, see the structure of how and what you should be doing at each point, along with getting this contractor locked up. And when I say locked up, I mean just on a contract, and make sure our deal is done right. All right. So we're picking up where the seller basically said yes to us last time. All right. So we've got a motivated seller wanting to get rid of their property, and we're ready to buy it. All right. But are we coming out of pocket with money? No, 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 no. We don't do that. What we do is we leverage paperwork. Leverage paperwork. So what we're going to do is, the first thing is we're going to create a contract and get this contract to the buyer. But before we do that, we got to go back and recheck some stuff. When they initially called us, if you'll recall, what we did was we did a quick scan of the title online. We went to the county deed of records and kind of look and see, well, is this title clean? Is there, liens and lawsuits all over the place connected to this person or not? And as I said before, 99.5 times you're going to find it's very clean, unlike houses, by the way. Okay, so then what we've got to do, though, is we've got to make sure before we get off the phone with the seller, they've said yes, and this is kind of where we're picking up now. We want to make sure whose name we're going to put on our paperwork when we send the contract over to the seller. So it's a simple question: who's on title? Who's on title of that property? Is it you and your wife? And sometimes I'll volunteer that. Maybe I've been talking to somebody and they've not mentioned a wife, because they're trying to keep her out of it, because that's what happens sometimes. They don't want the other spouse having to do extra trouble, and they're trying to make it easy or whatever. So I want to know if they're married or not. And if they are married, I like to throw that person on the deed as well, because we have community state laws which basically say whatever this person owns, the other person owns half of it. So if they're married, I want to know that going in. So I'll throw that out. So whose name is on the title? Is it you, or you and your wife? The other thing is, you might be talking to somebody who's talking about, well, it's a deceased person's property. It was my father, my mother, whatever. And then you've got to find out, how you need to title that as well. So I'll ask in the conversation, was there a will involved, or was it didn't go to there was no probate involved? So if there's a will involved, then the will has to get probated. It goes through a legal suit situation. And other people who die, I think it's called intestate. I don't remember. It's something like that. And that means that they died without a will. And so they go by the defaults of what that state says happens to property when you die without a will, which for most states, it's in order to transfer ownership now, you've got to have an affidavit of heirship signed by typically up to 3 parties, and typically 3, that can attest to say, oh, this person's had this daughter, this son, and I've known the family for X amount of years. So it's an affidavit of heirship, and you can get them pretty freely online. You can just download a blank copy, and I usually do, and I'll have them sign it and figure out who they need to do to get it signed. So if I'm dealing with something that did not go through probate, and they're not the executor or the executrix of the property, I've got to get an heirship signed. Now, if they go to a lawyer could charge $500 to $1,000 depending on how complicated it is to get an affidavit of heirship done. It's kind of ridiculous because it's not a big requirement, and we're not talking about buying the Taj Mahal here. We're just talking about a little cheap piece of property somewhere. So it's not a big thing. We just have to make sure it's legally there's the process has been done. And why I have no problem just sending over an affidavit of heirship. I will also include instructions on that. And I'm going to tell you one other thing that I found that makes it a lot easier is I'll tell them, well, let me do this first. I will send you over a questionnaire, and that will allow the affidavit of heirship to be filled out easily. All right, so what we're doing with the seller at this point is we're breaking down the process of taking something that looks complicated, because an affidavit of heirship does look complicated even though it's not. If you look at it, it's a series of maybe 5 or 6 questions, maybe 10, and they just have to be answered. And then once they're answered, then they fit into the blanks quite easily. So I make this process easy for them. I can't fill out an affidavit of heirship for them, but that's practicing law without a license. But I can send them a questionnaire, and all those answers go into that deal. So then I can send them an affidavit of heirship. I'll send them 2 copies. I can make it real simple for them if I feel they need it. And it's, again, you pick this up when you're talking to them. I can go down a blank affidavit of heirship, and in each blank write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each blank has a number, and that questionnaire that they filled out, I have the same number system on that. So all I'm going to say is it seems like all of those questions looks like they fit into those into the affidavit of heirship. So if you get this completed, then you can have it notarized, and then we're good to go. Now that's how you can take a normally complicated affidavit of heirship thing that will hang up some transactions if you don't simplify it for some people. Other people you don't. Other people say, "Oh yeah, I know what that is. In fact, we have one around here." Okay, good. That's the one they're using. Or they might have filed one already in their own county for other property that they had to deal with. Now, if that's the case, they can go down and get a certified copy of that if they don't have the original. But they can always go down to get a certified copy of that affidavit of heirship and send back with the deed. However, we'll cover how that gets done here, but they'll put that with the paperwork. All right, so that's real simple. So that's pretty much the gambit, I think, of working with probate properties. And those are mainly the 2 types of properties you're going to be dealing with. It's going to be they actually own it, or that. Oh, I'll tell you one other thing, and because I got one going right now, and that is when somebody's older. So I've got this lady where we're buying the property from her daughter, and but this lady is 93 years old. She lives in Texas, and the daughter lives in California. So I'm dealing with the daughter because the daughter has power of attorney. Now, in the trust book, I tell you again how to have them sign the documents when you're dealing with any of these people. All right, so the documents need to be signed properly. And the way you structure your deed. So what I do, it's like I guess that trust book is like a little mini legal course on how to do your deeds, so that you can do all these without pulling in a lawyer and getting feed to death. Because if you did this every time, it would just cost you tens of thousands of dollars a year, and that's just that you don't need. I mean, you just don't need it. Let's keep going. So now we've covered basically everything as far as what goes on the title when you're dealing with sellers. So we've got the seller locked up. And by the way, it may be a while before you get to any of the complicated deals. So your first initial deal is almost always going to be with owners. And if you want to skip any potential deals where you have to think you have to deal with executors or other people, just skip them. Go to the a deal where it's just the owner, and you're dealing with the owner, and when you're talking to them, there's no issue. So you can pick and choose if you want a real simple, easy kind of deal, or you can go to the more complicated because now you don't have that fear anymore because you've learned it. But the trust book is where you're going to learn it at. Okay, so let's move on. Three. So now we come to the point where we need to research, as I mentioned earlier, go back online into the deed of records and pull up the individual's name and search their names for any kind of liens or judgments or um, anything that could be negative on in the deed of records. Because if a person has an abstract of judgment against them, for example, or a tax lien against them filed in that county, it applies to every piece of property they own. Meaning they can't sell you that lien, or they can't sell you that property without paying off that lien. And that's probably not going to happen with the small amount of money we're generating for them. So we want to make sure that is the case. Obviously, if you find something, then you're back on the phone with the seller, discussing it, and finding out, well, was it paid off or not? Because if it was paid off, they may have paid it off, and maybe the person they paid off never filed the release on it. That happens. So you learn this just by communicating. So you see a problem, always just go talk to the person connected to the problem and tell them what the problem is and see what they say. They may very well say, no, yeah, that's a lien, and uh, I don't know how I'm going to get out of pay that. I can't pay that lien. And then I have done some suggestions in the trust book, like which one of course, obviously the big one is try to negotiate it down. The second thing is that you could try to negotiate it down. You could even offer to buy the lien if it's a individual, oftentimes, um, because they kind of already know they're never going to get paid on it, and they'll take 10 cents on the dollar for it. So it may financially all work out. And the way you do this, you arrange now to actually do a closing with a title company where now you have an escrow agent involved that can do the transfer and pay it off. So that's one of those rare times that you might use a title company. So now we've gone through the deed of records, and now the other thing we're going to do is go over and take a look at the tax records. So there's two things. There's the deed of records at your county, which has the ownership and liens and whatnot, abstract of judgments, hospital liens, all this stuff affect that. The other side is the tax office. And on a lot of counties, they'll tell you if that tax account is in a lawsuit. So there'll be a little area on there that will show you, oh yeah, it's in a lawsuit. But to be safe, okay, what we do is we do a quick search um, to find out if there is a lawsuit against it. And the other thing you want to search for oftentimes is to find out if there's a bankruptcy. Those are all very rare that you'll ever come across that situation, but it can occur. Now, if and you can call your county and ask them, well, how do I search to find out if there's a lien on a property? Or you can call them at the tax office and say, how do I find out if there's been a tax lawsuit filed on this property that I'm trying to buy? Because they're going to want to help you. All right, they will tell you what you need to do to go figure that out for that county. And man, we got 50 states and a billion counties, and all of them a little bit different. So you just need to ask them for your county what to do. And then the last thing that you want to do is to make sure that, just to check if there's any kind of code violations in effect on it. Now, for the most part, if you're in the county, that really just doesn't happen. It comes in as a lien if they've decided to go do something. I had this one property I bought that the county went in there and had to clean up the lot because it became a dumping ground for people, and there was a trailer on it, an old beat up trailer, and kids were getting in there and smoking whatever they were smoking, meth or whatever. And so the county, they got enough complaints that the county went in, bulldozed it, and then destroyed the septic system, which killed me to find out because I was only months away from this deal when that happened. If I'd known about it earlier, I could have prevented it, but I'll show you how. But they did that, and then they stuck a lien for $10,000 on that property. And believe it or not, even with that $10,000 lien on there, it was I still bought it and made a profit on it. All right, so um, that was okay. So that one, the financials on that, I bought it for $5,000. Had to pay the $10,000 lien, but I got 30,000 for it, and it was part of a package with four others. I bought each of those for 5,000 and sold each of them for 25 to 30,000. So that was a nice package, and so that lien that was not going to mess up my deal. And they were extra motivated to sell me this package at this super cheap price because of that one lien on there that they were kind of getting, they got screwed on it. They couldn't, they were trying to stall it off and they didn't know how. But if you get into a lien situation, and if I gotten in there a little bit earlier, and I talked to the guy at the county, don't ever be afraid to pick up the phone and call these people at the county, and ask them, well, how do I do this? Uh, you've got a there's a complaint that's been posted on there, and this is what happens oftentimes. You go out there to the property, and what the county has to do, they have to nail a poster on that property somewhere, sometimes they'll even fence it in. But there'll be an official legal notice being attached to that property that says this thing is going to be whatever they're going to do to it, in 30 days, and it's instructing the owner or anybody that has any kind of connection to the property to contact them. So they're giving you fair warning that they're going to be doing something. So, if you've gone out there and you've seen that, then call them and say, hey, wait, I'm buying that property. I'm in the closing process. Don't go do that. Let me get this thing closed and I will fix the problem. Because a lot of times you can fix the problem a lot cheaper than letting the county fix the problem. Okay, so we've covered that. Now, if you're in the city, those lots oftentimes will have code violations. And I've had them where a lot of times it's trash or it's overgrown weeds. So they go in there and they clean it up and they pop a lien on top of that. So now you've got that to have to pay off and deal with as well. Just keep that in mind. So we want to know what they are. If there's any on there, we want to know what they are. So you contact you contact your city, you contact your county and ask them, how do I find out what my if there's any code violations against this property I'm thinking about buying or I'm trying to buy. And then they'll tell you what you need to do. Now, if you don't want to do any of that, all right, because there's another easy way out of this is we have a link in our members area now to this company. So it's a title search company. So really at this point, you've got to get a title search done. If you're not doing it, you've got to have somebody else do it. So if you're just beginning, and my suggestion is you don't go do this when you're first beginning. Go ahead and pay the $300 total to get just the full title work, code violations, liens, everything. They're going to look at everything on a piece of property. And so you can have them, go in there and do that. And by the way, just so you know that where that is, you don't have to be a member of our membership to get it. But that's at protitle.com, I believe, or it's titlepro.com. So try either of those, but do that search and you'll find their company, and that would be the company that I would recommend that you work with. The owner of that company, by the way, wrote a great book. It looks a great book. I haven't read it, but reading the description, it teaches you how to do your own title search. So I think I've done a pretty good job in mine, but they might do overkill because you don't need as much, in the land business as we do maybe in the housing business, because we don't have some of the issues that these houses have. But either way, that's available, and now you know where you can go get it. And the great thing is you can order it online and have it done within a few days. So you'll know what your title looks like within a few days. Okay, then the next step is you want to find out about the HOA if it has one. So one of the questions I have with a seller is there an HOA? Oftentimes say I know already if there's an HOA or not because I've already bought in there, or I will have uh, uh, well, yeah, I will have already bought in there and know that it's in there, or I'm asking the seller on the phone, does it have an HOA? If I've never been in that subdivision, I don't know. I'll ask them. I can't depend on that answer, by the way, and you shouldn't. You ask sellers these things, and then they don't know. Sometimes they've been away from the property so long, or whatever, or somebody else handles it. It's all over the place. Sometimes they just want to lie to you. That's the other thing. So you still got to do your research. So what we do is we go online, we do a quick search online for that subdivision's name, HOA. If I'm out there at the property when I'm looking at that or whatever, at some point in the process you're out there, nothing better than just stopping at the house next door down the road. If I see somebody out, is usually what I do. I'll just pull up and say, "Hey, how's it going? I just bought a piece of property up the street here, and I'm just trying to find out, does this place have water? Does it have a sewer system? And does it have an HOA?" Those are generally my three questions. Those are the three questions that you can get other ways, but it's a lot easier just to stop and ask a neighbor, I have found. Okay, so we do a Google search on HOA for that, and oftentimes if it has one, then it's pretty easy to find them. So you're putting in obviously the search criteria, the name of the city, name of the subdivision, maybe a couple of different versions of the subdivision, and you should be able to figure it out. And then you can also always call a title company and ask them. Sometimes they'll help you figure it out, but usually you can get it off of Google. And then what you want to do is when you go to their website, you want to go through the website and look and just kind of get a feel for that subdivision. It tells you a lot. It gives you a lot of sales ammunition when you get ready to sell the property. That's one. But two, sometimes you can find out exactly what the dues are there for that HOA, but a lot of times they're not going to have that listed because it does change over time. There's a better way I'll show you in a second. But the other thing is read the minutes maybe off the last meeting, and you'll get a feel for how big or how small this place is. Are they kind of easy going? Or are they really strict? And oh my gosh, we've got we've got somebody with a dog barking once a year. We've got to sue this person to death type of mentality. Some of these places are, or is it not? Which is nice to know going in. But the last and oftentimes they'll have the restrictions listed there, so you can look at your block or unit number in the legal description, and then go in there and match it up to. Sometimes there'll be a list of 4 or 5 different blocks or units that they have different restrictions for. So they might have a place where only homes can be built. Then another phase where they allow mobile homes, and another phase another area block numbers and stuff that may be commercial. So you got these different restrictions that they put down. So figure out which one would fit with your property, and you can go read those restrictions, and now you know what the restrictions are on the subdivision. Because buyers will ask you, what are the restrictions, and that's part of what you're advertising anyway. When you put up the ad, you're going to give them, well, this is for mobile home or built homes or built homes only. I mean, you really need to nail that with your customer, otherwise people just won't call you because they're assuming it's something different. All right, let's take a quick break for a question or two, and then we'll get right back into this. Oh, before I don't want to forget this line of thought. I told you there's a better way to figure out what the current HOA fees are for that, and that's just to go to some place like Zillow or Redfin. Redfin does a pretty good job. and just look at the realtor.com. Just look in the listing details, and you'll find obviously put a property location in there that's for sale. Go in there and look at the property details, and that will tell you what the maintenance fees are, or the yearly HOA POA fees. HOA, homeowners association. POA, which is very common when we're dealing in our land side, is called property owners association. So if you've got a mobile home only subdivision, primarily, a lot of times they call that a property owner association. Okay. Elwalk. Howdy, John. I just signed up for your lot land membership, but I was getting an error message trying to log in. I filled out the contract form, but want to make you aware. Okay, thanks. I will. In fact, if you at johnalexander.com, well, there's a area where you can send me the exact situation, and I'll go take a look at it, and we'll get it fixed for you. Tax delinquent estate properties. A record search for tax lien judgment and other liens. How do you discount properties in flood zones? Wow, that's a whole. That's going to be a whole talk. Okay, so we'll eventually get to that, but and there's different types of flood zones, so you got to be, if you need to understand what the differences are in the flood zones, and now you can properly buy and properly sell those as well. Ever come across any environmental contaminants? No, I haven't. But I'm in Texas, so that helps. That's a joke, because obviously we have the issues here as well. But yeah, in the properties that we're dealing with, that's generally not an issue either that I've seen. Do deed restrictions really apply if no one in the area adheres to them? Man, they do. I mean, just legally they do. There are some subdivisions where they're not being enforced. I'll give you the quick rundown on that, because it's very important to know, I think, if you're going to be in this business. So there are some subdivisions that don't enforce it at all. And one of the things, in fact, I just kind of left off on it, but one of the things we're going to do at the HOA is call them. All right. So before we get off the HOA, we're going to call the HOA, a member. Generally, the president is who I like to talk to, and I find out, how the place is run. Can you get away with this? Can you do that? No, we can't. Or yes, people do that, and we don't care. What's enforced, what's not enforced. They will tell you all this stuff. And besides that, the other reason why we call them is to find out what's going on with the subdivision, because some of these subdivisions, they have a new phase coming in at some point, or maybe something is happening that's important. I got a couple of lots. Actually, I think I got a total of 4 lots in this one subdivision, and I called the president of the association, and I had noticed that Lennar Homes was in there, and they owned a bunch of properties, and they had built a bunch of homes, but they're not building anymore. So I said, well, I see that Lennar owns some property next to mine. Do you know what's going on with Lennar? And she says, oh no, Lennar just sold those. They had 200 more properties, and they just sold them to this other developer. I said, oh really? Who? ABC developer, whoever it was, right? And I said, oh, okay, well, I looked that developer up, and that's a really go-getter developer. So I'm thinking, okay, well, Lennar did their little premium thing, and for whatever they needed to skedaddle, but they sold the whole thing, and they had been sitting on it a long time, meaning that if this new developer comes in there and starts in, my property values could go up. So I'm just going to hold those. I could flip them, but I'm not. I'm just going to hold those and see, give it a year or two and see what this new developer does. But that's information, you wouldn't have known if you hadn't called the president and talked to them. So deed restrictions really apply? Okay, so yes, they do. And here's why. So if they are not being applied right now, it doesn't mean that they won't later be enforced. We've got the doctrine of latches, which says, when you overlook something, you overlook it. But it doesn't, for some reason, apply to homeowners association, which is like the god of all gods when it comes to real estate for some reason. And they can kind of make their own laws up, apparently. So yeah, they can go along and not enforce something, and then someday decide, yeah, let's enforce that, and then it's all over. Now you can go to court and make your argument, but you are going to have to go to court and make an argument. So is it worth it? I don't know about these. We're talking about a low end lot. Plus the fact, for us, we're just in it for what, 5 minutes. We're in and out. It's not really going to affect us. It's going to affect whoever you put into the property. But it's good to know, that you're not putting somebody into a potential problem situation without letting them know. Yeah, well, they don't enforce it, but doesn't mean they won't decide someday to enforce it. Is a survey required before flipping? No, it's not. It's not required. It's rare I'll do one. If I'm doing one, it's because I'm looking at my lot lines based upon my Google coordinates, and we'll get there. Actually, we're coming up on that pretty quick here. But we're going to look at the lot lines and figure out if there's anybody that's built their house on our lot. That's the only issue, and that's when I would order a survey before I bought a property, because I got to make sure that we don't have that as a problem. You don't want to sell a property that somebody else has bought a property, had built a property on, or put a fence line on your property. So I look at it, and a fence line is not a big deal, but if they put the house right up against a lot line, and it appears that it's over on yours, then you got a big problem. Now, most of the time, I would pass on that. Just because I don't want the headache and I want the time. And I would suggest you do the same. I won't even order a survey. But if for some reason, some magical reason, I was going to make just a ton of money on this deal, and then suddenly it's worth it. All right, it's suddenly worth looking at it and ordering a title. But for the most part, no. Now, I do my own survey, so I do my own title work and I do my own surveys. So, I mean, when I first started in this business, in the land business, the land lot business, my dad was a developer and we did our own developments. And the first thing I learned was that you have the licensed surveyors, and then you have the unlicensed surveyors. So I'm an unlicensed surveyor. You have a licensed mortgage company and you have an unlicensed mortgage company. If they make loans to somebody, you're basically, you're in the mortgage business. But you don't have to have a license because you don't fall under certain categories. You don't need it if you're doing some owner financing for an individual. Well, that's the way it is with a survey. So with a survey, I do my own surveys. So I've got, and I'm not even going to go into that because that's actually a training. All right, that's a training coming up. I think it's our next training next Thursday. But anyway, I'll save that for that. Anyway, that's my survey. All right, so let's get back to where we left off, and then we'll pick back up with questions. If you have questions, pop them in there, and we're going to go through it at the end of this training then and answer every question before we end the day, because we're only at 11:30, so we got plenty of time, and I'm almost done. All right, with today's training. So I left off with the last point I want to say: call the president, as we said, and just fill out the issues. Fill out issues, any future improvements, any problems. You also want to ask this question of the president or whoever you get, because sometimes you won't get the president, you get somebody else. Just ask them, because they all know what's kind of going on. They all talk. It's a club. And you want to ask them, was there any recent assessment? All right, so an assessment is when a HOA gets together and say, we need to raise extra money because our roads got flooded out, or the roads need, repaving, and we didn't have enough money saved up. We kind of blew it on that party last year. And so we need now to hit an assessment on everybody and get some more money in to make these improvements. And it could be, oh, it can be all over the place when they need assessments. And look, if they're doing it, it probably needs to be done. All right, I'm joking here, but what they do is they'll go ahead and send out a notice. Hey, you owe an extra $1,000 this year because we're doing the road project, and so now you owe that money. So one of the things that happens is a landowner will get that assessment notice and happens to get your letter at the same time and says, hey, I don't have to pay this assessment if I can sell this property, and I'll stick that assessment on this guy. So that's what happens to us sometimes. Now, has it ever happened? No, that I can think of. I know it has. Well, it wasn't an assessment, but it was something like an assessment. But it was something they decided to leave out. Let me put it that way. And you find it later. And you just have to deal with it. Fortunately, it's never enough. If it was a lot enough, they know. If it was a lot of money, they know I would just go sue them because they're supposed to deliver me good title. That's in every deed that we give out. So obviously, sometimes I'm just going to eat it. I'm just going to do it. I've had where they didn't pay an HOA dues, and so an extra $400 once I had to pay that. Didn't plan on it, but who cares? I made thousands on it. I didn't care. But I do care. I just don't. I hate it when people lie to me. So I don't lie to them when I'm doing their deal. So why are you lying to me now and costing me money? Anyway, so you get a feel for any past assessments because that could become a situation. Now you want to find out before you close. You're going to get a permission. We have a permission slip that basically gives you permission to contact the HOA and find out what their statement of account is. And you can also go online and look up statement of account for HOAs, and you can get the same form and fill it out and have your seller sign off on it. And that way you can send that into the HOA and make sure that if they haven't paid their dues, they got behind on their dues. And I've seen some dues that are thousands of dollars behind, and they just never foreclosed on them. All right, so every HOA is different. Some of them will, and you're 5 seconds late, and they're ready to sue you and take your land back, or not really take your land back, but place a lien against you. And then others will just let you go for years, and it just keeps adding up with penalty. Yeah, if there's past, and then we get an idea if there's a future assessment. So the other thing you want to ask the president is there any upcoming assessment that you can see? Because you kind of want to know that too. And now you've got a pretty good picture after that conversation. What's going on in the subdivision? What was the past like, and what's the near future like? Now, if I was just buying in a subdivision one time, I would probably never call that person. I would never even do this. I would be in and out of that subdivision. But oftentimes, here's what's going to happen in our business and in our strategies that I teach. We find a subdivision, and man, we're just on that subdivision for years. We never leave it. It just gets added into our list, and we go on and pick up another subdivision, but we're working all those subdivisions, and we learn all and over deal after deal. You're learning more and more about those subdivisions, so it's like it never stops. So it's always good to know going in what the situation is. But if it was a one-time hit, I mean, do you need to call a president? No, you don't. But I'm just saying it's good form. Sometimes it will, they have something big coming in there. Oh, we're going to put a golf course in there. Suddenly my $20,000 lot goes to $75,000 or $100,000. No, okay, I'm not selling yet. Check owner. Let's skip down one. Okay, so number 5. Oh, that was 5. Okay, good. So we covered 5 already. So we only have one more, number 6. Oh, wait. Let me see if I have a second page. Oh, no, sorry, guys. We have a whole second page we got to go through. All right, number 6. Check owner's name against other property. So we did that, and we did the code violation and all that kind of stuff. So we've already covered that one. I just skipped ahead, apparently. So let's go to our final page. Number 7 is the address versus the legal description. And you've got to determine that for drawing up the contract. At this point, let's go into an actual deal. All right, so I'm going to switch over here. this is an actual fake deal. Okay, so just so you know. Now, I'm going to keep it simple because in our members area, we have a we have a system where you fill out a buying package, which is what we're doing right now because we're buying from the seller, and then everything else is how you get rid of it. So either we sell for cash. I mean, sorry, down here we sell for cash, or we sell for owner financing. And if we do owner financing, and when we get to selling it, this is the sell side, so this is the buy side. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go in here, and we are going to. I've got a good fake deal in here, but it's actually pretty close to typical deals that I do. All right. And typical deals that you should be doing. So these are the numbers and everything should match out pretty close to it. So the first thing to determine is, do you have an address for the property, or are you dealing with a legal address? And that's a question I get a lot. Well, on my paperwork, on the sales contract and on the deed and everything, you're always going to really want to have the legal rather than the address. And a lot of lots don't have an address yet. They haven't been assigned. Usually, they won't assign an address to a property until you start to build on it. And now you're there physically and you need an address. Until then, it kind of remains just under a legal address. But some of them have been pre-assigned with addresses. I still won't use them. I want to use the legal. The legal is really what transfers ownership of a property. It's not a physical address. So, right from the start on the contract, I like the legal. It also looks better when you're buying a property. The way we buy it, long distance, there's a trust factor and all that. It just, your paperwork looks more professional. It looks like you know what you're doing rather than just putting an address in there. All right, so I filled out the date of a contract. I've put my closing date out to anywhere from 45 days. Generally, my closing dates I put out are 45 days. So then you'll put in the seller's name. Mr. Orange Juice is selling me this property. And there is a place for the home address, but I don't think it goes anywhere. I think I took it out, and I should just zap it out, just so you know. That's leaving soon. No, it's not leaving. I know what I did. I decided to leave it in there just because if you had it, you want to keep a record of it. That's why I have it. We just don't use it in any paperwork. Now, the other thing is you'll give it to your buyer, when you sell the property. So it's good to have it somewhere. And so if you get it early on, then you can put it in, you can put it in there. And so print this out and you have a copy of everything. So we have a sales price of $20,000. You'll notice that you put this in there without dollar signs. $4,000 of the earnest money. So they're going to pay me $7,000 as a down payment total. But up front, when I'm signing the contract with them, oh, wait a minute. Let me change this because I put all my seller information in here. I'm sorry, my mistake. Okay. So my sales price, I'm gonna put this back at $7,000 because that's typical for me. 0 earnest money, which is typical for me. 0 closing costs. All right, and then my name of my trust, name of the trustee, and the trustee address. And all this is explained in the trust book if you don't have this. Or if you have a LLC that you're using, you could do that. Or if you have a corporation you're using, you could put your corporate name in there. Or you could just put your own name if you have no entity and you're just doing your first deal and you haven't taken my advice to go use at least a trust, which is kind of free to get. I mean, you just pay for the notary. But if you do this, you could always just put your name in there, and now you are buying it, and then you leave this blank because or one of these, it doesn't matter because they both fill in the paperwork one after another. So put your name in one of these, and you're good to go. All right, then we update the record. And I've already updated and let me go back in here because I failed to mention it. All right, so we have logos and we have legal description. So I did a screenshot earlier and I put I used the upload here and I uploaded a legal description into the system and then I copied the link that it gives me. So when you upload, it's going to give you a full link, which is this whole link right here for the legal. So I came back with this link and gave me. And then if you want a logo, which I suggest you do because it makes your paperwork looks more professional, just upload a small logo and it will size it out for you. But yeah, just upload it. And when you upload it, it's going to take you back to the main page. So now you're ready to go down to review and print your paperwork. And you'll come in here. And so this is a special warranty deed in this case. Orange Juice, known now as a grantor, and this is the address, for $10 and other good and valuable thing, grant and sell and convey to John Alexander as trustee for ABC Trust, and whose address is this, and this is the legal. This is a picture, I think. Yes, this is a picture that was uploaded, so it's just being pasted in here, and we'll take a look at that. And pretty much this is all. Now, in this case, and I leave this in here, and you need to address this. Okay, so grantee, that's me, the grantee. The grantor is somebody who's giving the grantee something. The grantee is accepting whatever they're giving. So I'm accepting title here, but grantee assumes all unpaid ad valorem taxes and other property assessments for the existing year and all prior years. So that's a heavy statement, all right? That means I've done my research and I know that there is nothing outstanding other than maybe this year's taxes. So what I usually do is I will go ahead and use this deed and pay their existing taxes. So I'm not asking them to so that we don't get into this prorate taxes and figure out, okay, well, you need to pay me this and I need to pay you that and stuff like that. I'm just going to take it as is, and so that means I'm paying for this year's taxes, and that's really what this says. You can change that to for the existing year and put a period there and leave this out. So you can leave that out if you want all prior years. But there'll be some times when you might be buying a property and there might be 4 or 5 or even 10 years of unpaid taxes, and you're still buying it because it's a deal that's making sense to you. And then in that case, you can have that wording. So this is the wording that you just need to address on your particular deal. And then you'll see here that orange juice was put down here to be notarized. So they'll take this to get it notarized, and then we have our closing statement. And I'll go over the closing statement when I copy and paste this into the doc. So what you're going to do now is you're going to copy the full package. I mean, this is everything that you could possibly be buying in connection with. That's why in the membership area I give you a lot of stuff. All right, so now I've copied that whole thing and I come into a blank Word doc and I simply Control V or paste it in here, and I just pasted everything that I copied off the website, and it's formatted already. All right, so now I can make any kind of adjustments here. All right, so I got into a rush, right, and put little small TX in there. So these are the little things that you can correct now in Word. You want to take out some spaces, you can do that kind of a thing. Here's your picture, which means you can size it, to get a little bit more flexibility on, how much room do you have, to work with. All right, I'm going to go back and I'm going to leave it like that. Yeah, I might take a little bit. And here I'll look at this and see what I need to do. If I want to take it out extra line here, to get a little bit more space for a notary, I can do that right here. I can, delete right there. Now I've got that looking good. Now we're down into, now here's where your logo gets pasted in and your trust gets pasted in, and it's formatted into this format. And it just kind of stays consistent throughout all your paperwork. And then the closing date, gets put in there, and all of this gets put in there, and we could change this out, or we could go back into the main document and correct it, right? So it's just however you want to do it. Then the sales price is fed into here. The closing paid by seller, because now I'm saying, hey, Mr. Seller, you don't have to pay any closing cost. All right. So then we say what I pay as a closing. I pay everything. I pay filing fees, shipping costs, notary service, title search. And paying it outside of closing means we're not really addressing it here either. And so the total paid from buyer to seller at closing is $7,000. So that's your closing document. Now, legally, in all 50 states, you are required to provide a closing statement to all parties have to have a closing statement when you do a real estate transaction. So there's mandatory 2 documents that have to be done at closing, that always get done at closing. One is a deed, various deeds, whatever, and we'll cover those at some point. Then you've got the closing document. So those are the only 2 things you actually need to have signed to have a closing. And I know you go to a title closer and you've got like a stack of paper that thick, because there are all these disclosures. Half of them are disclosures that the title company has to have in place. That's actually what they do. Or if there's a bank involved, they have to. All this paperwork has to be done. But we're doing these little cash deals. 2 pieces of paper have to be signed. This is easier than selling a car, by the way. Because it's probably, I guess, maybe the same amount of paperwork involved in a car, but to me it's easier because now I don't have to go down and stand in a line at the tax office and register the car. I can do all this online, and I can do it all by mail and FedEx. So to me, it's just easier. All right, and then we come to our purchase contract. Now this was also filled out. Just in that little bit of form that we filled out, all of this has been done for you. And again, you can come in here, and if you need to make a modification, you can. That still needs to be done. Or you could go back and do it, in the original. If you need to put a blank in there, you're finding that you have a area where you need to put a blank. Well, when you're filling in your name in that area, put a blank in front of your name, for example, and it will bleed it through here, and then it's fixed, okay? But don't get hung up on little things. Nobody cares. They half read it. They go down here and they look, okay, 7,000, and there's a closing date, and they'll read through this, and most of it doesn't make sense, and boom, you're in. Here's a POA association information. If you're dealing with an HOA, you can change that to HOA, or you can leave it POA. It doesn't really matter. It means the same thing, and it's taken to mean the same thing. It's not legally required that you have it one over the other, but you're generally required. And of course, we're not requiring it on us because we're the buyer in this standpoint. But when you sell a property, if there's a POA or HOA involved, you are supposed to give a disclaimer or disclosure, not a disclaimer, but a disclosure telling the person the name of the POA and the address of where they're located, so that they can properly go research the HOA themselves. And if there's an associated fee. And I usually tell them in here what the fee is. So I have it right here, the amount of whatever. But going in from the sell side, I'll do the same thing. Excuse me. And that drinking coffee doesn't help. It doesn't help. I should be drinking water. All right, so then this is this is then signed, or you can also leave it blank and send it, depending on what you're trying to do here. Let's see, where are we at? Oh no, this is a sign because we've got a deal made. All right, so in this case, we're going to sign it, and then we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Orange Juice and Lemonade to sign it when they get it, and then they'll sign an accepted buy. Because you can put in, and you can leave this in or take it out, depending on how you want to do it. If I've got a deal, then I'm taking this out. I leave this in here only because sometimes we're going to mail out a contract to somebody who hasn't even told us they want to sell yet. You can mail this out to anybody if they've got a piece of property. and see if they sign it and send it back to you, because if they do, you've got a deal. But if I, which is typical, we're doing a deal where we've got a seller that's already accepted. No, this is getting deleted, and this is getting deleted. All right, so that we're saying, and let me expand this a little bit more. Signed and accepted by seller on date, and so we're getting this offer and purchase shall expire if not accepted by sellers and transmitted back. Okay, that's just intimidating and pushy. All right, which it works okay if we don't have a deal with somebody, but otherwise, you don't want to do that. And then we have some other stuff, and this basically now is your cover letter, and it goes over the process of the closing and different versions of what it will, what happens, and works to get us a little extra time. And then what is also printed out is that once you get something under contract, it's just, to me, it's just good. Since we're not dealing with a title company, and I wouldn't file this if I were, but since we're not, I'm going to file a notice of contract for deed, which is a memorandum of contract showing I have, an agreement in place to buy this property, and that basically kind of puts you in a title. And then here's a notary request. So oftentimes what we're doing is we're doing a notary situation with the buyer. So I mean, with the seller. So when we get to that, and we'll get to that point later, but we're having a notary show up and give them the check in exchange for the deed. So when we get to that part, which is after we sell the property and have some money to finish this transaction, that's what we'll get to. That's some of the ways of working this transaction, kind of locking up the sellers in the different ways that we need to lock them up and get them processed out. So we're right at 12, and I'm going to leave off here. I didn't finish what I wanted to finish today, but I need to call it a day. Where are we at? And I'm going to take some questions, though. So we're going to go right into questions from here. But I just want to mark where I left off. Okay, at number 8. Wow, we got such interesting stuff. And you know what I really wanted to get to today, because I brought it up, is this thing. I wanted to explain this to you guys, but we'll do it on the next one. It's an amazing little thing. Of course, I love doing stuff, little things I can do in the garage. Well, let's get into some questions. I gotta figure out where I left off. Okay, we don't use surveys unless we're developing the property. If we did need one for whatever reason, we would typically pay for it, but doesn't hurt to ask your end buyer or seller to pay for it. Absolutely true. If I order a survey, then I'm going to try and get it back from my end buyer by, in essence, telling them to pay for it. And nothing stops you from having a seller pay for it, other than they may not want to, and they may say, no, I don't want to pay for that. And so when you're dealing with landowners, it's a little bit different than dealing with sellers. Oftentimes you get the seller to do it, and typically, by the way, it is proper for the seller to always pay for the survey. That's how it's done. It's their survey. If they ultimately didn't sell the property for some reason, they get the benefit of the survey, and I, as a buyer, don't. So yeah, they're supposed to pay for it by default, but it doesn't work that way in the land business. John, you mentioned, this is Your Sweet Home 123. Is this your first question? Because I don't remember seeing that in there. Your Sweet Home 123. John mentioned previously that a survey may be ordered or in place sometimes to stall the deal with the end buyer. Yes, we use this. We use this as a stall sometimes, and if you're able to do it, if you're able to say that, if you don't have a problem understanding that you're the surveyor, then you can do it. So the stall basically is on. We covered in the last episode. Great nuggets as always. Thank you, Property One. And another one from Your Sweet Home: easements and encroachments can pose a potential problem, just depends on the lot. That is very true. Very, very true. The other thing that every once in a while I've come across, and not often, maybe twice, in years, and that is where an easement has been granted to have some electric company or gas company or something come across your land. And so, if that happens, a lot of times you lose the usage of that land. For example, and it's not that uncommon, okay? It's just not. Where a pipeline has been laid, and this these big thick pipes, they're pumping gas generally across the United States, and in Texas, if you go onto the railroad commissioner's GIS map and look at it, it looks like a maze around Houston. That's for sure. You probably have one within a rock's throw, but they're buried, and they'll have about 100 foot of easement on either side of that pipeline, or 100 foot total, I think, on either on above that pipeline. And they keep it clean, they keep it clear, so you can never build on it. So some people have sold at some point that pipeline when they were being laid. They went in there to the owners of all these properties and bought an easement from them, and they paid them money. So your seller in this case already got some money, and don't be afraid to bring that up. Hey, well, you already got paid, some money on this because you gave up half your land here, and so you don't have that much we can actually use. Now, technically, and I'll give you a what if scenario here. Like, if that system you need a septic system like an aerobic system, you can use that piece of easement to spray your gray water on. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's what you'd want to do, because you can't really use that property. You can't build on it. You can't even put a fence on it. It's got to be open. But you have the right to go walk on it, picnic on it, go start a fire and have a little campfire next to the gas line. You can do whatever you want with that property as long as you don't build something permanently on there, because that easement company will come through there at some point and bulldoze it out of there, and they won't even ask you about it. They just bulldoze it. So, but you can spray your gray water on there, and that's a great way to use it. But you'll find this when you do the deed search. So when you put in that person's name into the county records, you're going to look and say, oh, there was another deed given, or an easement, or whatever, that's going to be indicated against that person's name. And then the grantee might be ABC Electric Company, or whatever the easement's for. Because the other one is these big electrical wires systems that they run through, and those are kept clean and clear and open. So just be aware of that, because that does take up and utilize that piece. But it's you've been given fair warning in the deed of record, so you can find it at the same time and realize you're dealing with it. And again, once you start working in a subdivision, you're going to learn that subdivision. So the subdivisions I work, I know every wherever gas line is, and where the property lines and which property lines there are against those gas lines. You just do. I mean, you learn it right away. So you just get in there, you start working it, and you learn it as you go. And no one taught me any of this. It's not difficult. You'll learn it as you go. That's how you learn it. I'm just giving you some heads up on it, and that's why that particular part isn't in technically a training, because you don't really need it. Do you prefer to avoid lots that have a well or septic on it already? No, I don't. I would much rather get one with a well or a septic. That would be my preference, because you just have more value suddenly in the property. That could be an extra $10,000 worth of value that I'm going to mark that lot up if it's got a well and a septic on it already. Because it costs about $5,000 around here to put a well in, and about $6,000 or $7,000 to put a septic in, and but retail it escalates the price quite a bit, and you can even get $15,000 more for it. But typically I price another $10,000 on top of it. And I know that there's issues with, well, maybe the septic isn't big enough for the new house coming. Hey, not my problem. That's not my problem. They can always add to it or figure it out with their sanitarium when they get to it. That's not my problem. But they're getting a property that they could put a septic in, and they could maintain whatever size house for that septic, and that's not an issue. But that's their problem. Often these calls are great, very much appreciated. Well, thank you, Doug. I always like to hear compliments. Um, it's a work of love, Doug. It's a work of love. Usually, delinquent tax notices are posted about 2 months before the auction. Have you used this method to buy lots too? Look, I stay away from title issues. One of those are lots that have gone through the recent process. If it's aged up quite a bit, I don't have an issue because age covers a lot of problems. 4 years in Texas covers up a lot of problems from a deed standpoint, whatever, you know. But, on something that's recent, I just avoid them. I just don't. Now, you could. I'm not saying not to do it at all. Okay, that is a viable source. It's a good source, in my opinion. It's not my style. I know that for most people, they're going to have problems getting a title at some point if they get it. Now, the opposite side of that is most of these people won't need to get a title on it because that land can sit there years before they get to a point of developing it. And maybe they go through a title company, maybe they don't. If they get a mobile home and put on there, there's not going to, a lot of times there's not going to be title. They bought a mobile home and they're taking it to land they already own. There's nothing, there's no issue. So, you got to weigh these things out. I just don't like it. I just don't like you can have people from the past come up on tax properties. And here's, I guess, my biggest problem with it. You can have somebody claim, hey, I was not notified properly, and they can file suit, and boom, you're back on. And so you got, now you've got legal issues and you got legal troubles. So that's one of the reasons why title companies don't like to guarantee title on those properties, because they can. That's exactly what happens to them. So if a title company is not doing something, there's a reason, and probably you shouldn't be doing it either. But again, I'm not saying not to. That's a good business. It really is. There's nothing wrong with it. Is tomorrow a training or just Q&A? Tomorrow is just a Q&A, and I'm going to be doing some stuff, and I'll be describing what I'm doing. And you'll always learn. If you like real estate, you're always going to learn from listening to somebody do his actual deals, because I'll talk you through what I'm doing, and you can pick up little things, and I'll go into subjects that I normally wouldn't go into unless you and I were on a partnership deal and we were together and we were discussing this particular deal. Okay, here's some more finer details that we've got to attend to, that kind of thing. Which direct mail companies have the best rates for the original letter to owner seller? Okay, look, I've used two, but I just went immediately back to the one, clicktomail.com. I have never had a problem with them. I've never had missed deliveries with them. If you get first class, always get the first class stamp, and we'll get to that. We just haven't yet on how to put that all together. But yeah, they're my go-to. And so they can get my letter out. They can get my postcards out right. I don't need the fancy handwriting on the letter. That doesn't, in our business, that doesn't work. In fact, it may hurt you a little bit to handwrite those letters. So don't do that in our business. And again, I hate to tell people don't do something, but my advice, it's wasting your time. There's enough letters that you will handwrite. This letter today, I'm sending to the seller to sign the deed over. That is going to be, I will handwrite that out. So, good to know. Well, that does it for me. It's 12:12. I'm going to call it quits. And